to go ahead and get started. Just for reference, the clock on the wall hasn't worked in a long time, so it's now 5:30. And I will read the opening statement. Welcome to the Salt Lake City Planning Commission. Today's date is September 13th. The Planning Commission consists of residents from each Salt Lake City district that are appointed in a manner providing balanced geographic, professional, neighborhood, and community interest representation. The Planning Commission reviews and acts on any changes to the city's general plans, small area plans, special studies, zoning ordinances, and zoning district maps. The Commission also reviews and acts on planned unit developments, conditional uses, and certain subdivisions. And our first item is the report of the chair. And I have nothing to report except that we have two new planning commissioners with us today. We have Turner Bitton and from District 2 and Carlos Santos Riviera from District 3. So we welcome them. Does the vice chair have anything to report? No. We will move on to the report of the director.
Good evening. I just have a couple announcements for a few big city initiatives that we're working on. You may have seen an email blast go out earlier. So we're working on amendments to 21A50, a new Title 19, and some amendments to Title 18. All of these policy changes are coming out of the Thriving in Place study that just went to council for a briefing yesterday. We have 3 upcoming open houses. The first is scheduled for next Tuesday, September 19th. That's going to be at the Sugar House Fire Station. And then Thursday, September 28th at the Sorensen Unity Center, and October 4th at the main library. All this information will be on our website. So.
Thank you. We now have our 10-minute open forum for planning commissioners to bring anything forward.
I have something I'd like to bring up or speak on a little bit. And I want to give as a precursor how grateful we are for public input, and we love seeing so many community members here in these seats because it really helps us to understand where folks are in their neighborhood and what they're looking at. And I want to just comment really quickly on what the nature of our review is of projects that come here. And frankly, we can do a better job about keeping our discussion having to do with the nature of the questions that come before us. But we generally, we generally have a small scope that's limited to a few questions that have to do with projects that come before us, and they're usually narrow questions. We do have more room to comment on some of the larger issues that come before us, such as planned developments, development agreements, those sorts of things. But projects permitted by right are not brought before us for review, and if they do come before us and they're permitted by right, they are asking generally for variances from zoning ordinances or, from zoning ordinances. So that would be things like height of the building, setbacks, or parking requirements. And often with parking, we've got folks that comment and ask for there to be increased parking at projects. And we make note of those comments, but for the most part, when we have someone coming in front of us, they're asking for relief from that requirement in that they would like to have fewer parking spots for a project or have parking spots that are on adjacent property and having that approved. So I just wanted to make that comment because I think it helps us all to remember that really, even on the commission, our comments and our discussion should be limited to these narrow questions at hand. And then hopefully really quickly, I wanted to address an issue that came up at our last meeting. And I just frankly found it very concerning that in a state that is based on and founded on values of housing those without shelter, loving neighbors as we love ourselves, and comforting people without comfort, that we had a discussion in which folks stood up and said, I'm all for affordable housing, but not in my neighborhood. was concerning a project that was almost all affordable housing units, some that were quite large to be able to house families, and included some units dedicated for unsheltered persons. It's disappointing to me that we have a single homeless shelter in the state, and that shelter is religiously based, private in nature, and at times requires folks taking shelter there to participate in activities they may not otherwise choose to participate in. We also have some developments that have been built specifically for this purpose, Magnolia, Palmer Court, and Wendell Apartments, which there may be others that I'm not aware of. Those provide about 298 units for unsheltered folks. But other places that are available are primarily resource centers. In Utah, based on my research, we have about 11 out of 10,000 individuals that are unsheltered, and that rate is increasing at about 10 to 14% per year, and we are estimated at any given time at 10,000 to 12,000 statewide. The individuals that are unsheltered are only 48% of the population. That means the rest are families. 48% of the people who are unsheltered have a disability for which they do not have sufficient medical care and may not have disability benefits because they haven't had the advantage of legal counsel. 36% have mental health disorders, and because of their financial and employment status, do not have resources or benefits to address those disorders. So this housing shortage affects those in the lowest income brackets, which includes single parents, veterans who are often disabled and their pension is not sufficient to meet their needs, youth runaways and those kicked out of their homes. Often youth runaways are running away from severely abusive situations and can be kicked out because of beliefs, lack thereof, sexual and gender orientation, or drug use that's often due to a failure for these youth to be offered sufficient mental health resources as well. So in the community, when we're talking about affordable housing or figuring out how to house unsheltered individuals, we're talking about our grocery store workers, our postal workers, laborers, recreational protective service workers, teaching assistants, child care workers, substitute teachers. And so receiving comments about how these folks will ruin property values or lower property values or ruin the properties on which they live is wholly inappropriate. If we're willing to trust our children with these child care providers and teachers and substitute teachers, then it is disingenuous for us to suggest that providing housing for these folks is going to in any way negatively impact our city and our communities. So at the same time that we have these kinds of comments about affordable housing and unsheltered issues, we do have people come in wanting alleys vacated or more protections against quote unquote homeless people, which I would suggest their home is Salt Lake City, Utah, or the state of Utah as a whole. They simply do not have shelter, which is in fact a basic need of human survival. They have valid concerns about drug use, but I think we have to remember drug use is not going to go away unless we as a community decide to go back to the core values of respecting humanity, loving neighbors, sheltering those who need it, and provide mental health care so that folks are not looking to self-medicate in any way that's available to them. I think if we are looking at 11 unsheltered persons per 10,000 people, 10,000 of us should be able to find a way to help those 11. And I just have to say that in this planning commission, for people to come here and object to creative projects that make use of historic buildings and provide both affordable housing for those that make the lowest income in our state, as well as units for unsheltered people, I just can't tolerate the kinds of comments like, I'm all for affordable housing, but not in my neighborhood. If these types of people live here, it's going to make me frightened for my children. These types of people are our neighbors. So I just had to elaborate on that a little bit because I think as a city, housing is one of our biggest concerns. When I walk the streets of Salt Lake, and I go to several big cities in a year for travel for work, Salt Lake City has more visible, unhelped, unsheltered folks than in many of these major cities. And I just think it's a shame. And I hope we can return to some of those values that our state was founded on, which is that we take care of each other and love each other regardless of our circumstances. You'll often hear that these folks should work harder and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but the reality of what we're facing is that most of these people do not have boots, let alone the straps by which to pull themselves up. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Gale. I appreciate your comments and your candor. We will, if no one else has anything else to address, we will go ahead and move to the consent agenda, which our consent agenda procedures are still a little bit new, so bear with me for a moment.
Mr. Chair, too, we did need to modify the agenda. Should we do that before we start the consent agenda?
That's probably a good idea. The modification on the agenda, we've had a last minute change that has caused item number 3 on the regular agenda to drop off. So if anyone is here to give, well, and I'll read the title. It is 1518 Main Street Apartments Plan Development, case number PLN PCM 2023-00245. It's no longer on the agenda and its current status is kind of up in the air, so we'll see whether it returns again in the future.
Right, so just to reiterate, if you're here for that project, there will be no public hearing held tonight. Right. So the circumstances have changed. The property owner has put in a written request to withdraw his application for plan development, and so we can't discuss the item or hold a public hearing. So unfortunately, this is bad timing. This is unusual. This doesn't happen very often, and we would have liked to hopefully have had this information in our hand a week ago, 10 days ago, but this happened within the last few hours. So I'm sorry for anybody who traveled here and took your time to come out here, but we unfortunately can't discuss the item. Yeah.
And unless we have any other last minute changes, that's going to be the only change to the agenda. We will go ahead to the consent agenda. Our 2 items on the consent agenda are the approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, and also modifications to a design review at approximately 1050 South Washington Street, which is PLN PCM 2022-01165. And let's see, are there any modifications to the consent agenda that anyone would like to make? Seeing none, I will call for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
That is
Second.
a motion from Commissioner Gant and a second from Commissioner Gale.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Do we need a public hearing on the consent agenda item? No.
No.
No? Okay.
And we will approve the consent agenda, and this is we will approve the consent agenda. And let me just ask staff to make sure that I'm getting this right, that we do one vote to approve the consent agenda and do a second vote to actually approve the items on it.
I know. I think we could just do one motion to approve both the items on the consent agenda.
I could be wrong, but I thought, so the issue we've had in the past is some commissioners have not been present for the previous meeting and so cannot consent to the minutes. Today we in particular have 2 new commissioners who were certainly not at the past meeting.
Right.
So I think we, in this circumstance, may need separate
votes?
I'm gonna ask Paul, but I'm assuming we could have two motions. We could do a motion for the minutes or one.
Yeah, I would separate those out. Motion for the minutes so that the two new commissioners can abstain, and then
Okay.
and they should probably abstain on the other item. Well, unless they read them. What I don't even know what's on the consent agenda. My bad.
I do think our practice in the past has been as we take the vote, folks will say yes on item 1 and no on the minutes because I was not here or I
Yep.
abstained from the vote on the minutes. We have done that in the past.
That sounds more efficient than having two separate votes.
Yeah.
Okay. We will go ahead and take a vote to approve the consent agenda items. Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Bitten,
I'll abstain from both items.
Commissioner Santos Riviera,
Abstain.
Mr.
Commissioner
Chair?
Gant.
Mr. Chair, sorry, according to our policies and procedures, any abstentions also need to be accompanied by a reason.
Okay. The reason will be that they are new to the commission. Commissioner Gant,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
and the chair will also vote yes. That gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yes votes and 2 abstentions. And the consent agenda passes. We will move on to the regular agenda. The first item is Yalecrest Laird Heights Local Historic District, case number PLN HLC 2023-00074.
Good evening. This is a request this evening for a new local historic district located within the Yalecrest neighborhood of Salt Lake City. The proposed district is on Laird Avenue from 1300 East to 15th East, and it includes homes on Laird Circle and Uinta Circle. Planning staff is asking you to forward a recommendation to the City Council to approve the request. This is a map of the local and national districts within the city at this time. If you can see my cursor up on the screen, this is the Yalecrest area, and the proposed district is approximately in that location. Here's a closer map. The proposed district is in orange, and it consists of 68 parcels and 66 homes. There's two vacant parcels. Very, very small vacant parcels. Again, here's another map. Shortly, you will be seeing the Yalecrest Princeton Heights Local Historic District. That is also in progress, and I have inherited that from our former colleague, Aidan Lilly. The Yalecrest National Historic District has the highest concentration of period revival homes in the state of Utah. 66 homes, 68 properties, as I mentioned. 63 of the 66 homes in the proposed district are considered contributing, meaning that they are largely intact and that they contribute to the historic fabric of that neighborhood. So that's 95%, very, very high percentage. This is the designation process, and right now we are on step number 7, the commission meetings. This project was heard by the Historic Landmark Commission last Thursday evening. They voted unanimously to forward on a recommendation to the City Council to approve the district. Following this meeting tonight, should you make a recommendation, the public support ballot will be mailed out, and that is essentially a vote of the property owners, yay or nay for the district. Again, based on the analysis and findings in your staff report, it's the planning staff opinion that the proposed local historic district meets the applicable standards as outlined in your staff report, and therefore recommends that the planning commission forward to the city council a recommendation to approve the request. I have received several comments following the preparation and distribution of the staff report. Those have been placed in your Dropbox for your review. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to try to answer those for you.
I have one really quick question. So what is the standard for the vote when it goes to public support? Is it just 51% or is it a certain majority that they have to reach?
So the way the vote works is that we have to receive 2/3 of the number of votes that are sent out, ballots that are sent out. So 68 ballots will go out. We have to receive 2/3 of those back, and 50+% of the folks who return those ballots have to be in favor or opposed.
What's their time frame for returning?
Once the ballots go out, there's a 30-day period.
Okay.
We send out a letter midway through that to remind people to send in their ballots, but the balloting process takes 30 days.
Thanks, Lex.
Any other questions?
Seeing no further questions, we will go ahead and open the public comment. Let's see. We haven't received any public comment cards on it, but I will read our opening statement regarding public comments. Our goal is to provide a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. We ask that those in attendance adhere to a few ground rules. 1, silence or turn off your cell phones. 2, respect the person speaking and do not interrupt or do other things that could intimidate or deter others from exercising their right to be heard. Clapping, jeering, shouting, and other actions used to discourage people who have different opinions from participating will not be tolerated. People who attempt to diminish someone else's input may be removed from the room. If you do wish to speak, come to the microphone once the public hearing has been opened and state your name. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to comment. Your time cannot be combined with someone else's time. Everyone will get the same amount of time to speak so that we can ensure everyone is treated equally. If you are representative of an officially recognized organization and the item you wish to speak on is within the boundaries of your organization, you will be given 5 minutes. If it is outside of your boundaries, you will be given 2 minutes. 4, if you have a handout that you want the commission to see, you will need to leave copies because they will become part of the legal record. 5, when commenting, speak clearly, keep your comments on topic and brief. 6, questions asked during a public hearing will not be answered during the public hearing. Rather, the commission may ask the applicant or staff to answer questions after the public hearing is closed or ask city staff to follow up with you at a later time. First off, do we have anyone from any of the community councils representing this area who would like to give comment?
Mr. Chair, if I can interrupt, I think we should ask the applicant if they wanted to come up and speak. I wasn't sure if they had a presentation or if they wanted to speak, but I do know that they're available here, and so if they would like to
Thank
take
you
that
for
opportunity.
reminding me, since I assumed that the city was the applicant, and I had forgotten that this is an application that actually came forward from the city. So yes, let's have the applicant go ahead and come forward, and you will have 10 minutes for your presentation.
I'll only take 4
Thank you.
or less. I cannot believe I arrived here without my glasses, so I'm grateful that computers have large margins.
Remember to speak into the microphone and state your name for the record.
Good evening. Thank you so much.
Make sure the green light is on. You can press the button.
Good evening, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come and present my position on this today. On behalf of the Laird Heights Committee, which we did form a committee, I was honored to submit this petition and strongly support the designation of the proposed Laird Heights as a local historic district. Located in the Normandy Heights subdivision in the southwest corner of Yellowcrest, this large tree-lined rolling hill area contains 66 houses, of which 95 are considered historically contributing. Laird Heights is also listed as a national on the National Register of Historic Places. So why create an LHD for Laird Heights? As neighbors, we take pride in the uniqueness and charming streetscapes of Laird Heights. We want to preserve these and the historical significance Laird Heights contributes to the city. We want to maintain the wide variety of housing styles, sizes, and relative affordability and fit to the neighbor's historical architectural type. Laird Heights contains a variety of architectural types, which is very unique and exceptional and unique beauty, including English cottages, English Tudors, Colonial Revival, Spanish Colonial Revival, Dutch Colonial, French Norman, bungalows, and early ranch, built by highly admired Salt Lake City builders in the 1920s and 30s. Notable property owners, including city and national politicians, attorneys, insurance, investment, government, and commercial industry executives, builders and developers, an astronaut, a professional race car driver, all who are highly influential in developing the prominence of Salt Lake City and the Intermountain region. For example, Jake Garn, mayor of Salt Lake City, U.S. Senator, Navy pilot, and astronaut, grew up in Yellowcrest neighborhood and lived on Laird Avenue as an adult with his family. As you know, he became the first sitting member of Congress to fly into space and flew aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery in 1985. Abe Jenkins lived in Uinta Circle for many years during the 1930s. Abe was the 24th mayor of Salt Lake and a professional race car driver. He was instrumental in establishing the Bonneville Salt Flats as a world-class racing venue. He held the land speed record of 161 plus miles per hour with his car, the Mormon Meteor, for 50 years. Between 1940 and 1990 were the period. The Mormon Meteor was displayed for decades up at the U.S. Capitol and now is part of the Price Museum Speed here in Salt Lake City. The LHD designation would minimize the demolition of existing historical homes in our community. The designation is the proposed Laird Heights as LHD is consistent with city policies encouraging preservation of physical structures and cultural history. There is strong support for the LHD designation among neighbors. 66% of property owners in the proposed LHD signed the petition, that is twofold greater than the 33% required to initiate the city process. The proposed Laird Heights district is contiguous with other designated LHDs within the Normandy Heights subdivision of Yellowcrest, including the Normandy Circle, Harvard Heights, and immediately south of the other newly proposed Princeton Heights LHD. We strongly urge your approval of this Laird Heights as an LHD, and we really appreciate your consideration and support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant before we open public comment? Well, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open public hearing. And if there's anyone from the community council representing this area, if you can come to the podium now. Well, seeing no one, we'll go ahead and open it to everyone. And if anyone would like to speak, go ahead and walk up to the podium. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes. And you can pick it up if you want to.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. My name is Kathy Kenningham. My husband, Doug Rollins, and I live at 1457 Uinta Circle. The house is known as one of the first Beaner block homes built by Carl Beaner. Also, Ab Jenkins, Salt Lake City mayor and of Mormon meteor fame, lived there at 1457. I moved to Uinta Circle in 1980. I had the good fortune to be neighbors with 4 of the families that were original or early residents of homes on Uinta Circle. They were lifelong residents. In 1980, Mrs. Gaddis and Mrs. Boyden lived alone. Both the Romney family and the Petty Strasser family had raised multiple generations in their homes by that time. My lovely neighbors built their homes, raised their children, planted flowers and vegetables, gardens, and trees. They served as leaders in their various and varied work and community organizations, as did many others. I am thinking of 100 years of contributions by the people who lived and have lived in the Laird Heights Avenue on 1500 East, Uinta Circle, Laird Circle, 1300 East, and Laird Avenue. Establishing a local historic district respects and preserves what all the people in this neighborhood accomplished. That's why I strongly support the Laird Heights Local Historic District.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who would like to speak? Yeah, go ahead and step up to the microphone and state your name for the record, please.
My name is Paula Harleen. I live on the corner of Princeton and Laird, so our house is kind of a peninsula, so from our windows we can see the sweep of Laird where then it kind of turns into Princeton, and our house faces Princeton. But I love Laird Avenue, and I just wanted to say that the neighbors in our neighborhood really appreciate their homes. And for example, today the streets were lined with carpenters, painters, designers, glass people. People are keeping up their homes and they care about them as historic properties, and each house is unique, which is really exciting. Today at my house, I had a carpenter working on replacing the doors, like 1980s doors, with single panel doors and glass knobs like they would have been back then. It's also a very walkable neighborhood, and people are outside talking to their neighbors. It's a wonderful example, I think, of a historic neighborhood that I think is sort of a gift to the city to kind of get a feel for what life was like 100 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to give comment? Go ahead and step up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name's Luke Mischler, and I think I need about 12 seconds. These houses are, essentially, the ones that are currently listed on the market average about $1.8 million. So the assertion that this is affordable housing is meaningless. I'm a mechanical engineer who makes 95th plus percentile wage of this country, and I couldn't afford to live in that neighborhood. It's a beautiful area. I love it. I love to walk around areas like this. I love to visit friends in areas like this. I have no issue with the existence of areas like this. I just think that housing's real expensive in Salt Lake City, and families will not be moving into these areas unless they have 2 lawyers in that family, or similar house constitution. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Go ahead and approach the microphone and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name's Emery Schwieger. I have a question more than anything. My sister lives on Laird Circle, but I was just wondering, like, if it does become a historical district, what are, like, examples of limitations that would be set on homeowners that they wouldn't be able to do, or that the process would be harder to get things done, like painting or replacing doors?
We'll have our staff member address that after we close public hearing. Anyone else? Seeing no one else, have we received any emails in the meantime? Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this item, and we will bring it back to the commission to ask questions of our staff member on this, and also the applicant if we have any questions for the applicant. Also want to remind everyone that we will be forwarding a recommendation to the city council on this, so the decision that we make is not the final decision.
Chair, I'd like to say I heard during the presentation that the Mormon meteor was on display at the U.S. Capitol, and I know for sure it was on display at the Utah Capitol for a really long time. So I think that's where it was. But it happens because the U.S. Capitol was played by the Utah Capitol in Legally Blonde. So they're quite similar. It can happen. And I would also like to hear maybe if staff can tell us what are some of the things that will be different about this block if it becomes a local historic district.
I'll ask a follow-up question that's related to that.
Remember to speak into the microphone.
Do we have any maps in the city that indicate all of the local historic districts around the valley, and will designating this area a local historic district have impact on things like ADUs and that kind of stuff?
So, yes, is a map of all the national and local historic districts located within Salt Lake City. Essentially, all of the local districts are also on the National Register. In terms of what people can and can't do, when a local historic district is designated, any sort of modifications to the exterior of the homes, buildings, and or the property are subject to review by the city for historic appropriateness. And so if you want to re-roof your house, change out windows, repair stucco, do additions, do accessory structures, any of those types of things would fall under review. The vast majority of the applications that come through the planning department are preservation related. And while not all of them are complex, they're still the largest number by application. Approximately 90% of those applications that do walk through the door are approved at an administrative level. 10% or so would go to the Landmark Commission. What else have I not covered that you guys asked? Oh, about the affordable housing. The affordable housing has not yet been adopted. It's hard for me to speculate how that could affect this area. That said, it is hard to imagine that because of the value of the properties in this area that would be an issue, but never say never.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? City Council discussed changing I realize it's in progress to change our minimum lot sizes and allow potentially up to 2 units per lot. The goal of designating local historic districts is to make it more difficult to demolish an existing structure. Is that an accurate characterization?
I would not say the goal is to do that, but that is certainly a consideration, because once a district is designated, then the city does have a say in demolition. And if you are a contributing structure, or difficult to demolish.
So it would certainly make it more, if the goal of changing our citywide zoning would be to allow more housing units, it would certainly make it more difficult for a local historic district to be consistent with the goal of that citywide change.
I can jump in and address that question. I think the two goals can mash up quite beautifully, and we encourage evolution within local historic districts. And historically, I would say our other local historic districts are denser than other areas of the city, especially avenues in Central City. But say, for instance, we do modify some of those single family requirements of loosening up some lot regulations, lot width, and allowing 2 or 3 family. These buildings, if it was to pass as a local historic district, could be modified to house those units. What we look at as far as like the regulatory body are exterior changes. So if they needed to accommodate a rear addition, we would look at that. But any sort of interior changes to accommodate additional units, we wouldn't, as far as planning is concerned.
Within the existing structure, though. But if there was something passed to allow, say, 4 units per lot, and a developer decided to the only way to accomplish 4, say, townhome units on that size lot was to demolish the existing structure, it would seem difficult within the local historic districts to achieve this. If the only way of producing new housing is to remove an existing structure entirely.
Yeah. Yeah, you could develop in the rear. I wasn't saying yes to you, I was saying yes to John. Sorry, but yeah, you could develop behind the house. I mean, I think the goal is to try to keep historic structures, which was one of the priority goals in the RMF 30, which was like a reward, right? You keep the existing structure, you get an additional unit, and you can accommodate that however you see fit. And so ideally, we like to see an outcome that the historic structure is kept, because typically outside of Yalecrest, those are naturally occurring affordable units. And then additional units can be placed behind the structure.
But just give you an example. Suppose I have a wonderful Yalecrest home, and in the back of it, it has a wonderful Yalecrest garage, and that's dilapidated. Can I tear it down and build an ADU and a garage on top? Garage with an ADU on top?
Yes. So garages are not considered contributing structures, and we regularly approve the demolition of accessory structures at a staff level. And ADUs are approved at a staff level quite regularly as well. They're not considered new construction.
Can we get a copy of this map on our Dropbox?
It's in your staff report.
It is in the staff
Yes.
report. What page is that on?
It's in the attachments.
I wanted to comment that you can learn a lot about local historic districts by watching some of the landmark meetings, landmark hearings, because it seems like people really like being able to tell their neighbors what they can and can't do with their house, but when it comes to what you can do with your own house, you may want to think about if you can change your own windows on your own house, or how hard it would be to change your front doors and your doorknobs if it was a local historic district. But that apparently is a decision for those specific homeowners. They'll get a chance to vote for it. So
I have a quick comment, Chair. I am in favor of this because I'm in favor of preserving historic architecture and preserving character within the city, and recognizing that there's a small cultural component to having an area designated as a historic preservation area. I just want to say the importance to me on this is that we're preserving historical architecture and character. The history of who lived in what house does not matter. We can keep those records elsewhere. And frankly, those types of things, to me, this is going to be a huge surprise, come across as elitist, because those houses have come down over generations to folks who have privilege over and above that others have had. So my decision, I want to be clear, is not based on any kind of history of any individual structure, but is in terms of the overall goal of preserving history and architecture and the character of the city.
Lex, that map is not in our report.
It's on our website, and if you would like, we can certainly get that out to you.
Yeah, the PowerPoint presentation is in the Dropbox, and that does have the map on it.
That's true too.
Oh.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion if there are no more comments.
Thank you.
Based on the findings listed in the staff report, testimony, and information presented, I move that the Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council to designate a new local historic district for the Yellcrest Laird Heights as proposed.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Barry and a second from Commissioner Gale. We'll go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Gant,
No.
Commissioner Bitten,
No.
Commissioner Tuttle,
No.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
No.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
and the chair will also vote no. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses and 5 noes. The motion fails.
I'd like to make a motion. Based on the findings in the staff report and the information presented discussion, I move that the Commission forward a negative recommendation to the City Council regarding the request to designate a new local historic district, Yellcrest Laird Heights, for the following reasons. I find it to be inconsistent with goals 3 through 5 of Plan Through Salt Lake. Those refer to our housing, transportation, and air quality goals. I also find it to be inconsistent with Housing SLC and Thriving in Place.
Mr. Chair, I'll second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Gant and a second by Commissioner Bitten.
Excuse me, Chair. I believe you do have to reference the standards in the staff report to find a negative recommendation.
Not for a zoning recommendation, not as an administrative. This is not an administrative application. It is a zoning application, and we've referenced the standards that guide all of our development in the city, which is Plan Salt Lake and Housing SLC.
Okay. We will go ahead
I just want to make a comment discussion to that motion. I think it is a folly to actually assume that anybody is going to go into this neighborhood, tear down a house, and build a fourplex. The reasoning mostly behind, I think, the efforts to create local historic districts over an area that is already on the National Historic District is to prevent the demolition and then rebuild of a massive home that is a single family home. There's no multifamily going on in those. And we can see that as the fruition of what's been going on in the surrounding neighborhoods. So to actually think that forwarding a negative recommendation would equal more housing, I feel like that is just nonsensical. And that's just my thoughts to this motion.
Chair, can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
One of the delightful things about this neighborhood is the trees. They're big, huge, tons of trees. And every single street in our city should have big, huge, tons of trees. Every single street, every corner, every neighborhood should say, "Oh my gosh, come see the trees on my street." And that would make a huge difference for all of the things that are important to us. So I think let's maybe focus on what can we do to the whole city that makes it great in the way that people love this neighborhood too.
If there's no further comment, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Tuttle. Yeah.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
No.
Commissioner Bitten.
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
No.
Commissioner Gale.
No.
Commissioner Barry.
No.
And the chair will vote yes. That motion passes 5-4. That will forward a negative recommendation onto the city council, who will have the ultimate decision. Our next item is Simondi and 300 North rezone and master plan amendment. Case numbers PLN PCM 2023-00361 and PLN PCM 2023-00499.
Good evening, everyone.
Remember to make sure the microphone's on and that you're close to it.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question real quick?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I need to declare a conflict of interest on this item.
Okay.
Haven't done that before, so.
I think we usually require that he state the nature of the conflict
Yeah,
of interest.
because sometimes we require people to leave the room if it's been.
Employer.
It might be a situation where you may need to leave the room.
Go hang out back there for a little bit.
Okay. All right. This is a petition for a zoning map and master plan amendment at Simondi and 300 North. We'll start with just the property location. The subject properties are 4 properties along Simondi Ave and 4 properties along 300 North. The current zoning is R1 7000, which is a single family residential zone. And they are proposing to rezone to RMF 30, which is a low density multifamily residential zone. This is located in the Fair Park neighborhood under the Northwest Community Master Plan. And the applicant is NeighborWorks, which is a local nonprofit, and they intend to build affordable housing on these properties. As you can see from the map here, you can see that the overall vicinity of the property and the neighborhood is mostly single-family residential with some multifamily across the street on 800 West. It is nearby a school. There's recreation in the area like the Jordan River Parkway and mobility options. There's the 900 West bus that goes straight to downtown, a 300 North bike lane that also goes straight to downtown. It is near 2 tracks on North Temple, including that commercial corridor, and also has easy access to the highway. The applicant is also proposing a master plan amendment. As mentioned, this is located in the Northwest Community Master Plan, which was adopted in 1992. So given that it is over 30 years old now, most of the plans and incentives initiatives in this plan are relevant to the neighborhood issues today. And so staff has used Plan Salt Lake as our guiding document for the zoning map amendment standards. So, but the future land use plan does designate this area as low density residential, which it is currently zoned. And so the applicant is proposing to amend this future land use map to be updated to medium density residential. The existing conditions on the property, 7 of the 8 properties are currently vacant. On the 8th property, 1 fourplex exists. As you can see, it's in a pretty serious state of disrepair, and the applicant is in the process of receiving those demolition permits. It has also gone through the housing loss mitigation report, which is attached in the staff report. As you can see, there is a public alley going through the middle of the subject properties. The applicant has not applied for an alley vacation, so this alley will remain accessible and open, and no building will be allowed to be built over it or block its access. So on the north side, the subject properties add up to about a half an acre, and on the south side, it's 0.44 acres, which will come into play when we discuss the development standards. So the intent of the RMF 30 zone, which is a low density multifamily residential, the intent is to maintain the existing physical character of established residential neighborhoods in the city while allowing for incremental growth through the integration of small scale multifamily building types. The standards for the district are intended to promote new development that is compatible in mass and scale with existing structures in these areas, along with a variety of housing options. So this zone is unique for a residential zone because it does apply design standards, which include the regulations of building materials, ground floor glass, building entrances, entry features, and the screening of mechanical and service equipment, all of which are not required in the current R1 7000 zone. So just to visually compare the types of housing that's allowed between zones, in the R1 7000, obviously only single family detached are allowed. And in the RMF 30 zone, you can have single family detached or you can have single family attached, like a townhome or a row house. Twin homes are allowed, multifamily apartment complexes, and cottage style homes and tiny houses are also included. To compare these development standards, in this column we have the R1 7000, and then here are a few types of the housing types in the RMF 30. You do get an additional story of height in the RMF 30 zone, so you can build up to 30 feet tall, whereas you would only get a 20 to 28 foot height with a pitched roof in the R1 7000. But a lot of the front and side yard setbacks are very similar, so it would have a very similar front yard feel to the development as a single family zone. For minimum lot sizes, it is 2,000 square feet per dwelling unit, and this didn't fit in the table, but for cottage style homes and tiny homes, that is 1,500 square feet per dwelling unit. So when we think back to the half acre and the 0.44 acres on each side, or a total of, I think it's 40,000 square feet for the entire development, we're talking approximately 20 units for the entire development if they choose to do one of these housing types. And it would be up to 24 units if they only did tiny homes or cottage style homes throughout the entire development. So going through the zoning amendment standards, as outlined in the staff report, this proposal meets these standards. Adding housing, especially affordable housing, is a priority of the city, and it's in the city's best interest to offer as much affordable housing as possible. The purpose of the RMF 30 zone is to provide a variety of housing that fits the scale and character of the surrounding development, including single-family residential neighborhoods. Design standards help ensure that good architecture and urban design standards are followed in development. So due to the standards and the staff report, the planning staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council. A lot of questions and comments from the public have come up stating their concern with not knowing what the developer's exact design and plans are with their intent to rezone. So those were, the applicant is, I believe he is here today to try to go over some of the ideas that he has for this area.
Thank you. Can we have the applicant go ahead and come forward? And state your name for the record, and you'll have 10 minutes.
Hello, my name's David Foster, and I'm the real estate development manager for Salt Lake City, or for NeighborWorks, I'm sorry. And so our plans, and I actually sent those today to.
Which one did you want me to pull up?
It's the photos of the plans. Yeah.
Yeah, you might want to get closer to the microphone.
This one or the other one?
Yeah, so that one's fine.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is we're not really 100% positive until we get the rezoning what we're going to do, but our initial plan is to come up with townhomes. And so we've been playing with different ideas, doing some normal stick builds. We've been looking at container homes, and so in trying to get affordable housing, we're really looking at all options. But as you guys know, NeighborWorks' intent is to create some nice housing that fits in with the neighborhood, that doesn't harm the neighborhood. And so our idea is just to pretty much we'll come up with townhomes for this area. If I do have some pictures that I'd like to share with you guys, you can pass around. I didn't get these uploaded. If I can just hand these to you, you can send them around. The photos that I'm sending them around right now is some photos that were what's been there. And I can't speak on to how long it's been in that condition. Maria could, but I know I've been with the organization coming up on 12 years, and this area has been ran down. The houses were boarded up. They were being broken into. The garage was collapsing. And so this area has been really ran down for a long time. And we've actually been looking at this property for a long time, trying to, see if we could acquire it. And so much that we were concerned that another developer was going to come in and do the high-rise units like you're seeing that's popping up all over on the west side. So we're trying to actually protect our neighborhood by putting in townhomes in there instead of letting, a higher density building going on over there. So one of the ideas that we have is what's up on the. I'll let you. Can you do it for me? This is one of the ideas that we've come up with, and again, we're not sold on any certain type of unit yet, but we do want to do some kind of a townhome style. It'd be like 2 and 3 bedroom units, nothing big, nothing too large, and again, the exteriors that's on that is not what we've decided on. That's just for presentation. And what we would do is when we do decide which direction we're going as far as what townhome style we're going to do, we would look at the neighborhood, we would look at the exteriors on the existing homes and try to get something that is fitting and fits in with the rest of the neighborhood so it doesn't stand out from what's already there. So we would take a lot of the characteristics from the existing homes and stuff and try to make it match up to that. And so this is kind of one of the when this company did this design for it. This is how this one turned out. And again, we'd be looking at some cottages because cottages are allowed here. We'd be looking at some 2 bedrooms and a few 3 bedrooms. Yeah, and there was another one too, but this is the best one. If you want to pull up the other one.
Just have these two.
Yeah, and this is just another layout design that another builder did for us. Very similar. It just shows the row houses that they were talking about earlier. And so, yeah, we're just trying to do something good for the neighborhood that fits in and trying to come up with, affordable housing for you guys. And so, any other questions for me or?
Yes, thank you. Any questions from the commission?
Can I just ask a quick point of order? Paul, there are rules about exhibits and what we do with exhibits and how they get entered into the record. Could you please refresh our
Yeah,
memory?
if somebody submits an article for the commission's consideration, a visual, a letter, whatever, we need to retain that for our records. We can always scan it and send it back if you need those photos back, but we do need those for our records.
So the only rule is that a copy
If
has
it's-
to be retained.
Yes, if it's something that's presented at commission that you don't have in advance, we need to keep that.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this property is relatively close to Interstate 15. Do you have any sense or idea of whether or not the proposed I-15 expansion will impact this property?
So if I may, Commissioners, good evening. Maria Garcia, I'm the CEO with NeighborWorks Salt Lake. For those of you that are familiar with the organization, we've been in that community for a little over 30 years and have developed most of the units in the Guadalupe neighborhood and the Jackson neighborhood, so over 100 units. And I-15 is, yes, a risk to Jackson neighborhood, which is where this property is, but it's actually 2 blocks away from the I-15. I think the only other thing, if I may, Chairperson, mention is that NeighborWorks has been focused on acquiring this property for a little over 15 years. We overpaid for this property because it was a way for us to protect high density going into that neighborhood. I think we're excited about the property. The neighbors are excited. I think they're just concerned about what we're planning to put there. We're not yet sure on what the final design will be. But we have been working with some architects to, again, take in the characteristics of what's in the neighborhood, how can we build these homes for under $400,000, hopefully. As an affordable development, we'll look at putting some of these into our community land trust so that we can help families that are 60% and below. So we do appreciate the city staff working with us on figuring out how we rezone this.
I have another question for staff. Is RMF 30 not considered low density?
Because it's a multifamily zone, typically we define medium density as between like 15 to 30 units per acre, which this would be qualified as.
If we have no further questions, we'll go ahead and move to the public hearing. Do we have anyone from the community council that would like to speak? Don't see anyone from the community council. We have 2 cards. So the first card is, and excuse me if I pronounce your name wrong, Eric Boehm. Go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you, and you've pronounced that great. My name is Eric Boehm, and I am a little concerned about this zone change. I have lived across the street on 300 North and 800 West for 13 years and have worked in real estate residential development for 17 years. And I am very much in support of NeighborWorks and their mission, and I also believe that this zone change should not receive a positive recommendation today, based mainly on the fact that this is the first plans we've seen. When I talked to David Foster, I got mixed messages about what the actual plans were going to be. The public utilities, including water and sewer, will be impacted in the neighborhood, requiring off-site upsizing, which the development review confirmed. The increase in density will also add significantly more traffic to an already overused and dangerous intersection on 300 North, and as well as significantly increasing the amount of vehicles parked on surrounding streets. Before approving any zoning change, I feel like the planned use should be taken into account, and this seems like we've got a couple different plans, but really are we going to end up with 3-story apartment units? That's the biggest concern that I have. And spot zoning small islands like this RMF 30 surrounded by single family zoning is not in the best interest of the neighborhood. And what's not highlighted in the presentation is that the purpose of RMF 30 low density, according to the Title 21A zoning ordinance, is to, quote, provide a transition between single family housing and larger multifamily housing developments. And this isn't creating a transition between large or high density and single family. It's just going to expand an already expand this island and spot zone the area for the RMF 30. I don't understand why they haven't looked into, or why we aren't considering doing rezone to 1 in 5,000 or one of the SR 1 or 3 zonings. And I think that would be more appropriate and fit more in lines with the neighborhood.
That's 2 minutes.
I do appreciate NeighborWorks and think they do a great job.
Thank you. We have Dan Stewart. Go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Dan Stewart. I live next door. I'm on 817 Samandi. You were talking about historic homes. My home was built in 1905. They built race cars in the garage for the state fairgrounds in the 50s. That's just a side note. But I feel strongly that developers present a building plan. There was a lot of unsures there. And could you go back to the picture? It was on the board of the, that's theirs. That in no way represents our neighborhood. There's no pitched roofs, there's no porch. Could you go back to the other picture? The ones back, not to their plan, but the other unsure plans. Well, anyway, there were 4 or 5 pictures of smaller buildings, but in the center there was an apartment complex. There was just a box with windows. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to give public comment on this item? Seeing no one else, did we receive any emails? No emails. We will go ahead and close the public comment and bring it back to the commission.
I have a question. This property is in a historic district, a national historic district, is that correct?
Correct.
Is the National Historic District reviewed by the Landmark Commission or by the Planning Commission when it comes forward?
It's only eligible for incentives through the.
I'm sorry, I can't, you're going
It's
to have to
only
speak.
eligible through incentives through the federal agency. So the local historic planning commission doesn't interact with it much.
Yeah, Salt Lake City does not regulate national historic districts. It's just an incentive-based district, so they're eligible for 20% tax credits, and yeah, through
But
the state
it's
and
not
federal.
reviewed by them. If there's a conditional use, for example, like in the National Historic District, then the Landmarks Commission does not review it.
Absolutely not. no.
Okay, so it comes back to the Planning Commission if there's some change from some conditional use or
That's
some other.
correct. It would just be planning commission or a building permit.
Okay.
Sorry, but we've closed the public hearing. I'm
Does it-
sorry, but we can't.
Does a 30-foot flat roof let you have 3 floors? Is that 3 stories? Could be 3 stories. And a 28-foot pitched roof wouldn't have 3 floors, right? Okay, that increases the 1 story.
Cassidy, I have a question regarding to the existing conditions of these particular parcels. I wonder about any existing traffic reports that have been done by the city. Is there anything that I can refer to? If you can please just inform us about the current conditions when it comes to traffic in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, so both 800, sorry, let me bring up my map here. Both 800 West and 900 West are pretty wide corridors that can accommodate quite a bit of traffic, as is 300 North. And I know that everyone is always worried about parking in these developments. All the units are required to have at least 1 off-street parking, if not 2 in most cases, depending on the housing type. So they are required to provide that off-street parking. And like I said, there is access to tracks to the south, and there's a very direct downtown bus right on 900 West.
So I just want to make some general comments at this time. When we receive requests for a zoning change without an actual plan, sometimes that raises concerns that can really not be satisfied by the review in the staff report, because then we're left to look at what could happen. And sometimes what could happen is drastically different than the current zone. So when I look at the difference between the R1 7000 to the RMF 30 zone, we're not seeing a lot of difference. So in height, 28 feet to 30 feet. Whether that becomes 2 stories or 3 stories at some point has some irrelevancy, because we're looking at how tall can you build this. With RMF 30 being a medium density, only, you said 20 units, 20 type buildings could actually be on these particular parcels combined, and that seems a pretty low transition. I mean, obviously not as low as if you just had, 4 homes, but we're not going to house a lot of people with that. And I live in an RMF 45 zone, and I live adjacent to really low density, medium density, and high density. And so I see how those interact just fine in my neighborhood. But I understand that something new and something that we don't know exactly what it is can be a little frustrating. So if we look at the differences between what's proposed and what is, we are going to see very much a pretty similar side yard setback, front yard setbacks. They're negligible in those differences, and the height is going to be the same, within 2 feet. The Cassie provided the types of off-street parking that's required based on the different types of uses. And again, yeah, they're going to have to provide up to sometimes 2 off-street parking spaces for every unit that they build. So I feel very comfortable forwarding a positive recommendation with this one, even though we don't have an actual plan, because it's going to have to fit within the parameters that we can evaluate within the staff report.
Chair, I would like to make a motion then. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to jump in to reiterate, I think, what Commissioner Barry said, and also to remind all of us that when we're looking at a zoning change, that is all we're looking at. And so her approach of saying, what is the difference between what is currently permitted and what might be permitted, even if we have plans in front of us that someone is proposing, we have no guarantee, and there's nothing holding them to those plans. And so it would be extremely unusual to require a set of definite plans when we are just looking at a potential zoning change. So I just want to be clear about that, because I think we often hear from neighbors, I want to know exactly what's going in. But guess what? We never do. When you have a zone and people own their property, you don't know what they're going to do with it. It just has to comply with zoning. So I really appreciate that approach, Commissioner Barry, of carefully looking at what the differences are and whether that can fit within the parameters set for zoning changes.
I just want to maybe clarify for our discussion and build upon what I learned last meeting when Kelsey corrected us. So a lot of times the potential proposal that would happen would ultimately come back before us, so there's a plan development, etc. But in the RMF 30 zone, a plan development can be administratively approved and wouldn't necessarily come back before us. So I do think sometimes the absence of a plan can be a little concerning. So that's why I always am going to really default as like, what could you do? Would I be comfortable with what you could do? And in an RMF 30 with those rule changes, we may not see that come back before us, but we may also. So the question I think for me and perhaps fellow commissioners would be, is whatever the potential development still, adhering to the standards and to the plan, whether it's going to be a master plan or the other overarching housing plans within the city? And does the differences in the 2 zones, is it too drastic? Because we may not see a plan development come before us if the city council approves this to be an RMF 30. So there's no guarantee that whatever an applicant may do is going to always land before us again to review. But oftentimes if it's big enough, especially if the differences in zoning is is very drastic, then there are different mechanisms that those would obviously come back before us for review for whatever reason. But this one, I think we can't guarantee that, but the question then becomes, are you comfortable with what could be allowed in the RMF 30 zone based on the table in the staff report?
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Based on the information in the staff report, the information presented and the input received during the public hearing, I move the Planning Commission forward positive recommendation to the City Council to approve PLM PCM 2023 00361 and 00499.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Commissioner Santos Rivera and a second from Commissioner Berry. Any comments to the motion? We'll go ahead and vote. Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
No.
Commissioner Shear.
I am concerned that the newly built project will not be consistent with the grain and scale and of the neighborhood, so I'm going to vote no.
Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. That motion passes with 6 yeses and 2 noes. And that will go on to the City Council for the final decision.
Can I say the city council can make decisions for totally different reasons and based on totally different stuff? So feel free to make your comments. You should make your comments to them because they may just see it totally differently.
Yeah. I think we're going to go ahead and take a break. Because the third floor restrooms aren't accessible due to construction, we'll take a 10-minute break since we've got to take the elevators to get to the restrooms. So we will come back at 7:03. and get started again. The next item, item number 5, is commercial rezone at approximately 1300 South. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00385.
Good evening, Commissioners. Similar to the last item that was before you, this is a petition to amend the zoning map. And the role the Commission has tonight is to make a recommendation to the City Council for approval or denial. The request is by Tyler Morris of Cottonwood Residential, representing the property owners, and it's for the 3 properties at 2260, 2270, and 2290 East, 1300 South, which are shown here in yellow. This is a view of the subject property looking south. As you can see here, the intersection of Foothill Drive, 1300 South, 2300 East coming together. And then in this image you have the 3 single-family homes with a gas station and C-store to the west, the former currently vacant Red Robin restaurant, and then a hotel to the south to give a little bit of context on the site. There's also a cemetery to the east, and the neighborhood at the bottom of your screen, which is to the north, is a R1 12,000 single-family neighborhood. So to give a little bit of site context, this shows the zoning map here as it stands. These 3 properties are R1 7,000, surrounded by CB on 2 sides, R1 12,000 across 13th South, open space to the east. And here's an image of the 3 homes that are currently on the property, that are all in common ownership currently, and they are all used as rentals at the moment. There's no specific development plan proposed at this point, but it is anticipated that if this rezone were to be approved, the property would likely be combined with the property to the south, the large parking lot and Red Robin property, and would redevelop as one property. So this is giving you an idea of the surrounding area. Across the top you see some of the single-family zoned properties to the north. Those properties do not face 13th South, rather they face the streets on which they're located, the north-south streets. Here's the large parking lot to the rear of these properties with the hotel in the background, and an image of the cemetery and the gas station and restaurant property to the west. So in looking at this rezone, first we look at the purpose of the CB zone, the community business zone, which is to integrate moderately sized commercial development with adjacent residential. And so it's kind of a transitional zone between single family and commercial. Looking at this zone, of course, the biggest difference from what's there now is the permitted uses. It does allow mixed use development, medium density multifamily residential, and community scale commercial development. Looking at the lot and bulk differences between the R1 7000 and the CB zone, the maximum building height is similar to the last one you looked at, just 2 feet, 30 feet instead of the current 28 feet, but that would allow for an additional story. And then there's no front or side yard setbacks versus the 20 and 10 front and side setbacks of the R1 7000. The CB zone does have additional design standards. that are intended to help it transition and integrate with residential areas and be a little more small scale. It also includes a review process that any building with a footprint over 7,500 square feet has additional standards in the code, but also is required to go to design review, which would come before the Planning Commission. In looking at this, we also look at how the request complies with the master plan objectives. And so we look at the Plan Salt Lake, and it does support initiatives in neighborhoods, growth, and housing by potentially allowing a zone that would allow for greater density of housing, but and that would also allow for small-scale commercial that would make a more complete neighborhood. This is part of the east. Well, let's see, actually I wanted to mention with housing, this would also potentially provide housing that's not too common in the East Bench area with moderately scaled housing. It is part of the East Bench master plan, and looking at that plan, it does support various initiatives in there. First and foremost, to provide a diverse mix of housing choices for all life stages. So again, that area is predominantly single family, and this would provide for some additional options. And then there's also commentary in there about targeting Foothill Drive for mixed use and medium density residential. And again, if this were to be approved, it could combine with the property adjacent to it, which would then connect it to Foothill Drive. And so we see that as a good opportunity to complete this initiative. And then again, it's creating a people-oriented development at a community level compatible with adjacent neighborhoods, which really is, the CB zone is probably the best zone to be able to do that. I also wanted to mention, this item did go before the East Bench Community Council. They did not hold a meeting regarding the proposal or invite the applicant to present, but they did recommend denial, and they provided a letter which has been provided in your staff report. So looking at this, other potential concerns either from neighbors or in the considerations for a zoning amendment, we look at the compatibility again. The additional height really is not too different than what's currently allowed. There was some concern about parking and traffic, but I've provided a breakdown of the different types of streets and their purposes within your staff report. But it's important to notice 2300 East is a local street, which would have the lowest, usually the lowest use. And then 1300 South is a collector street, which this type of scale of development would be appropriate along a collector. And then Foothill Drive, if it were to connect to that, is an arterial, which provides the highest level of movement, traffic movement. And so this potentially could connect into all those, being an appropriate scale for the surrounding roads. Also, the CB zone is part of the neighborhood center parking context, and I know those are slightly new to everyone still, but this is a context that recognizes that there's a smaller scale development, but that would that's integrated with neighborhoods, but would still need to provide parking, as there's not good mass transit options available. So that most of the parking for any future development would be able to be provided on site, or would be required to be provided on site. And then also looking at the neighborhood character, again, as we talked about, CB zones intended to provide integration of these moderately sized commercial developments with the adjacent residential neighborhoods. And they have specific design and development standards intended to do that. One last thing, as a requirement for any zone that's going to be potentially allowing uses other than residential. If a property's rezoned to allow for something else, then they need to meet the requirement for housing loss mitigation, which this property is proposing to do through a development agreement. That agreement has not yet been recorded, but has been prepared and would replace at least 3 units of housing should these ones be demolished in the future. And with that, staff's recommending approval, subject to that development agreement being recorded and finding that it does meet the standards for a zoning map amendment and it fills the intent of adopted plans and policies.
Thank you. Would the applicant come forward? State your name for the record and you'll have 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm Tyler Morris. I work with Cottonwood Residential, working as representative for the owner of the property here. I don't have a ton to add to the presentation that was provided by staff. I think they hit most of the points that we think of as germane here as well. You know, this little pocket of these 3 existing single-family homes is kind of wrapped by that CB zone and is a bit of an oddity in that little wedge or pocket of the city here. You know, immediately to the west of the westernmost house is a Wendy's drive-through that's connected to that gas station, which goes 10 feet away from the house on the west side. You know, to the east you have the cemetery, and to the west is, to the south is kind of a 120 stall surface parking lot right there. As Eric mentioned, the intent here, you know, this is the same owner as the Red Robin site to the south. The expectation is that we would hope to combine these, retain the Red Robin restaurant as a new restaurant, but the space as a kind of continuing enterprise for a restaurant, and then build probably a 2 or 3 story multifamily project on the east side. That's not a certainty, but that's kind of what we have in mind and what we've talked to with architects. The scale of that, given the restrictions on CB, would be pretty similar to the hotel that you can see to the south here. You know, at 30 feet, in the way that height is measured with the amount of grade change you have here, you're really capped at kind of 2.5 above ground stories. So we probably have a subterranean level of parking to provide the kind of 1 to 2 stalls of parking, and then a couple of levels of apartment on top of that. It's probably in the 50 to 75 unit range based on kind of what you could fit there as a ballpark. But, you know, we view this site as a great opportunity to provide some additional thoughtful density to the area. Obviously, an amenity-rich corner where you have kind of retail, restaurants, you know, good automotive access or car access on Foothill, good access to the bus system, but, you know, not kind of fixed rail, rapid transit kind of stuff. So, you know, a using that brings in a new variety of housing that's a little underrepresented in that area, I think is a good transitional use from the folks to the south into the kind of commercial center as you move through. So, but I'm available for questions or comments as needed.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
One for you. So when looking at the kind of property of that triangle, how much of that massive surface parking lot is attributed or owned by the Red Robin? Like, what's...
It's the whole parking lot.
The entire parking lot?
The whole parking lot is, yeah. So it's 120 stalls there currently.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah.
And so then my question then for staff is, given what he just said, that you know, the goal maybe is to do some thoughtful density and some multifamily housing, why does CB continue to be the preferred proposed zone change? Is there a different zone that could accomplish that? I guess I'm curious if that's the goal of kind of multifamily, some density. Why are we going with CB?
Well, CB was the request, first and foremost, so we don't make recommendations on other zones. We go with the request. But CB is appropriate as a transitional zone from single family, typically, so it's a kind of a next step, but, you know, there could be argument that maybe there's potential for something greater density given the location along Foothill, but
Then I would direct that question to you then, because sometimes staff helps guide like the right zone. So I assumed that, but
Yeah,
that's
I'm-
good. Why CB if that's your goal?
Yeah, I mean, part of the primary driver is just context, right? Where the rest of that wedge is currently CB, and it seems like a consistent request with the density and scale that's in the area. The other part is that CB does present what we feel like is an appropriate mixed-use transitional scale, where I don't want to overreach and try to put something that's 10 to 15 feet taller than the hotel that's to the south, in between kind of single-family residential and where this is here. I think that would certainly function there, and I think would succeed. But candidly, we would be concerned about the amount of public concern about going higher there, and potentially concern from the commission as well.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just mention, I think CB has come up a lot recently in different meetings. I think context makes sense. The rest of this block is also that. The CB zone also, probably 5 or 6 years ago, we added specific design standards in the CB zone to help make it more compatible with neighborhoods. And we set size limits that would trigger a design review at relatively low size, so that something would be required to come to the Planning Commission. It's not present in most of our other commercial zones. And so I think that's one reason why we felt comfortable using the CB zone as a way to buffer between lower density and then obviously, like, as we're getting closer to Foothill, some higher density projects.
Thank you for that reminder, John. Also, then, if then this whole kind of area that you would then own is CB, then, I mean, I'm just curious if then any new type of development would take away some of this surface parking lot and like actually use it for something worthwhile.
Yeah, the current super preliminary expectation is that the restaurant piece would stay, and then there would be basically like a double loaded parking aisle that went to the east of it that would service primarily that restaurant and potentially exit onto 13th South. And then east of that would be a subterranean level of parking underneath the apartment structure. And you'd have kind of 2 stories on top of it. So there would be no more surface parking as a part of the apartment piece, just about 40 or 50 stalls that would serve the restaurant.
Okay, so then theoretically, staff, if then a development came back in was taking up this massive area of surface parking lot, that would trigger a design review under the CB zone. Yes.
It'd be based on the footprint.
So if we're expanding beyond these
Anything
3
over,
home
with a
parcels,
footprint over 7,500 square feet would trigger design review.
so what does that translate to the map?
We'll be
That's up there.
We'll be well into design review. for
Okay,
sure.
so I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
I'm not sure how I became the commission historian, but that's referred to as the restaurant formerly known as Marie Callender's.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
If we have no further questions, we'll go ahead and open up the public comment. Is there anyone present who would like to give public comment? Seeing no one, I'll ask if there's any emails. We'll go ahead and close the public comment and bring it back to the commission for further questions or a motion.
Okay, well, I have some comments now that we're in this phase. I try to hold off on those. At initial reading of the staff report, I was reluctant to do a CB zone because one of my worries, and I don't think that it does really jive with the East Bench master plan, of having commercial in this particular parcel, given what we've seen just a little further west on 1300 South for some of the commercial like restaurants, and what that does to parking and traffic, which is really it's a big impact. But in listening to the presentation, I guess I'm torn because I don't want to see further commercial in these zones because I don't think that's appropriate, and I don't feel that based on the standards of those guiding principles that this is part of the Foothill Drive corridor, and I worry about the impacts and neighborhood impacts. So, but I guess I am open to, I am really keen on seeing that big surface parking lot be reused for something more appropriate and actually useful to the city in terms of housing and the community. But I don't know how we can ensure that we won't see commercial here, because I don't know that I would be able to be supportive of that. So I'm torn, because I like what you say your intent is, but what could happen is of some concern to me if then you sold it and the next person was like, no, I want to put a restaurant here, which I think then would be incompatible with the standards of analysis based on neighborhood impacts and compatibility to the East Bench Master Plan. But I'd love to hear other commissioners' thoughts.
If I may,
Yes,
just
please.
a reminder, there is a requirement, it would have to have at least 3 units put back on. So if that was economically feasible to just build 3 units, that would be surprising. But yeah, that is a requirement, not just from staff, but that's part of the standards that they would have to do. So regardless, 3 units would need to be placed
Oh, I
back
thought they
on the
could also
property.
then just make a nice donation to the Housing Loss Mitigation Fund and call that good.
Well, that was why we're requiring the development agreement to replace the 3 houses.
Say that again, John, sorry.
So that's one of the reasons why we've asked them to enter into a development agreement, which they've been willing to do that. With the development agreement, actually states they have to replace the housing, and so they cannot just use the payment factor.
I have not read the motion yet, because I generally don't do that before the meeting. But does the motion also have a consideration that we will forward X type of recommendation, and let's say it's positive? That is there then a contingency on that motion to include the development agreement that lists housing replacement?
The motion just refers to being consistent with the staff recommendation, which is in the
Okay,
report.
so that's something we could add.
It
if
is a
we wanted
little
to.
vague, the motion, and
We could
you may
make
want to tighten that up when we do it to say that it references the agreement specifically in attachment I think it is.
Okay. Those are helpful to me, and if other commissioners have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
I have a concern with the addition of access to commercial parking off of 1300 East. It seems to me that most of the all of commercial parking that is happening with that restaurant now is coming off of Foothill Drive, and this would bring that traffic into 1300 East, into the neighborhood in a way that it doesn't happen now. And I would prefer that we somehow not allow, I mean, it's okay to allow the residential parking, but to have a big parking lot in back of the current Red Robin that is only accessed off 1300 would seem to bring unnecessary traffic into that neighborhood.
I'm kind of on the fence on this one. It does concern me this is not serviced by mass transit, and we're adding density and congestion if there's more commercial. I'm always kind of mixed because I know the city doesn't control all of our mass transit. It's sort of a constant frustration that we're stuck with this transit system that is such an impediment to our city goals. I have mixed feelings, I guess is all I'll say.
And may I add to that? I agree with everything has been said right now. I think that the premise is that the applicant has not stated an intent for the proposal for this property. I understand that there's a housing mitigation loss agreement. However, my fear is that there's currently 3 properties that are being used for rental. These families already residing there. Then we're just gonna probably, make this even smaller units for additional, redundant other units, right? But then again, we don't know what's gonna be the use for this property. So I guess I'm a little bit confused about the order of the ask of the applicant. Perhaps maybe proposing something and then asking for some sort of zoning amendment to it. But just because I don't see any proposal I'm a little bit also on the fence.
So if I can just jump in again once more with the order of how these things go, is that the owner can come and apply for a zoning change, and our decision is to look at the differences in the zones and see if we feel like that's appropriate based on what they're asking for and the standards that we're asked to make our decisions on. They are not required or asked or ever is it appropriate to ask an owner to come in with a plan of what they're going to do before they zone. If they bring in a plan when we're looking at a rezoning request, there's nothing tying them to that plan. They could get the rezone and then sell the property, and the next owner could redevelop it just within the confines of that zoning that now applies to the property. And I mean, I just look at this picture and I think, like, we talk about spot zoning, and this seems like the exact opposite of that. Like, we would be rezoning this piece of property to align better with exactly what surrounds it. None of the houses on the other side of, what is that, 1300? Is that what we were saying? Even face that street. And so, and I think, you know, if they're entering into a development plan, then there are several options in terms of, and there are several impediments in terms of what street things will be accessed from. There are lots of approvals that have to happen between now and then. And to say we're going to maintain these three maybe medium sort of, who knows, maybe well-kept, maybe not well-kept rentals, rather than help develop some more maybe commercial with residential on top. It sounds like some really creative thinking that's happening. And again, we have no guarantee of what's going to happen, but it just seems to make sense. Like, there is nothing on this that would convince me to leave this as a single family residential. There is no way that a lot there that I wouldn't want to build a single family house there. It just seems crazy to keep those 3 lots zoned as it is when it's surrounded by this clearly commercial area. So,
can I respond to any of the comments, or am I done?
Go ahead. Respond.
Just a couple of functional responses to the thoughts there. Traffic was brought up by the community council in that area as well. And kind of the one thought we have when we're looking at it is that currently, you know, the Marie Callender's parking lot is, the access is 23rd East as well. So 99% of the traffic comes off of Foothill Drive, but you can exit onto 23rd East and then go either north or south and then collect onto 13th South again. So, I mean, changing these 3 doesn't necessarily change the traffic pattern that would hit 13th South coming off of there. And from a feasibility standpoint, you know, the restaurant that's there, we would never remove the Foothill Drive access from that restaurant, because for access to any commercial, that is a superior access point than wrapping around 13th South or driving past the gas station and then into this serves as a better kind of primary access to the whole thing. And just as kind of a secondary thought, you know, the inclusion or rezone of these 3 projects allows us to kind of more holistically and thoughtfully put together a project on the whole thing. But if those don't get rezoned, then probably something in the middle gets redone anyway. That's either a smaller multifamily piece behind, and these 3 likely stay or get sold or whatever it is. I mean, they're, I think, currently rentals, but I don't know what the plan is long term.
I'd like to speak a little bit to Commissioner Gale's comment that this seems like an island. It only seems that way if you're looking at it in plan. If you're driving up 13th East, you suddenly go from a commercial area to a green aspect, which is the residential. So you really view that area as part of the entrance to the residential area. So in redeveloping this property, I hope that we would also see that green aspect appear as well. It's not something we can require, but we already require street trees and so forth. But to have that setback there being used, there's no setback required in a CB district. And so I'm hoping that we'll see a setback there that will mirror somewhat the residential properties that are in the neighborhood.
I think when we consider rezonings, like we talked about last time, you say, this is what you could do right now, and this is what you could do if we change the zone, since we don't have a plan. And those are different. One is a residential use, and a commercial business or community business is a lot of things that might not be great there. Like they're not going to put a glass recycling facility, but what if they do? Or what if there's a limousine company put in that right there? Those are things that would be allowed in a community business that are not allowed right now in residential. So that seems like well, it is. I'm going to say it is a bigger change than changing from a low density to a mid density. So maybe it makes, I don't see how, I think that if they need more density in order to make this whole project work and to make the whole thing work as a holistic consideration, one big piece of property, then maybe those 3 squares right there could just be a higher density residential. And that makes sense to leave some of the setback like Commissioner Scheer was talking about. And I kind of think that makes sense. There's, one of the statements in the East Bench Community Council Master Plan, East Bench Master Plan, is that automobile access should be from Foothill Drive to discourage additional traffic in the adjacent neighborhoods. And if that's, that is part of the neighborhood. Right now it's a neighborhood with 3 families living on it. And I think that kind of losing the residential zone on that changes that corner, that access to the neighborhood. So I would be more in favor of, let's do a higher residential multifamily. Let's keep it residential. It seems kind of weird to be saying we're short on residences everywhere and we're short on this type of higher density residences in the East Bench. So let's change this to commercial. And I realize that residential is possible in a commercial business, community business, but it's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed, but I think the economics of that parcel are such that they're going to put in significantly more than 3 units.
Well, but
that's my guess, just looking at it.
Commissioner, again, if you could make the economic argument in this one, you certainly could have made it in the historic district.
Right.
On who am I optimizing for? What's the objective function here? The economic argument. So if the goal is more housing units, I think this is likely to achieve more than 3 housing units at the end of the day. Because I just think the economics, if they can do up to 2 or 3 stories, I could be wrong. On the historic district, to explain my vote since you've asked, it was unquestionable in my mind that would, in expectation, result in fewer housing units. In expectation, unquestionably. Since you asked, if that's the optimization.
These 3 single-family lots could be, if the Affordable Housing Initiative takes place, they all could become row houses, or they all could become.
The economics that we've been through the affordable housing incentives, they're not going to work made to transform that. That's not what's going to happen on that parcel.
They could build ADUs right now.
Yeah, but
they could. There are ADUs in that neighborhood. Anyway. I think that what we're considering is, here's a list of stuff you can do in this zone. Here's a list of stuff you can do in this zone. Should you be able to do all this stuff on this lot right here? That's what we said the question was, and that's the question in this case too. If you like all those things on the list of what's possible, if we have to consider every single one of those things as possible, and you like all of them, then okay, then the rezone is the thing that you'd recommend.
You have to probability weight them, right? You have to weight them by the probability of getting this, and the probability that you're going to get a large wind energy system, I'm putting 0.01% on that.
A reverse vending machine?
Also 0.01%.
I had to look up what that was.
Commissioners,
I think
one
I'm
thing
all
we
for,
could
I'm all
just
for
mention.
increased density, multifamily. It's a great place. Lots of people should live there. Lots of people should be able to live in this neighborhood. But let's have them live there and not put in another restaurant that has a liquor license because it's a good place for that. You know what I mean? Let's make sure that it's housing, and maybe 3 units doesn't compare. These are maybe naturally lower cost housing than what you usually find in East Bench. And if they build, or whoever, they or the next people who buy the rezoned lot build a huge luxury. That's not a place for these 3 or 4 families to live.
Mr. Chair, I'm willing to make a motion if there's no other comments or discussion.
Could I just add one time? I just want to make sure we're also keeping in mind, they do have to do some residential. There does have to be at least 3 units. So,
Right.
and I'm hearing what everyone's saying. I do want to keep that in mind, that it could not just be a recycle collection station, which, by the way, is not the same as a big plant out west. It just means that you collect recycling. But you are very right that we can't dictate all the uses on there. And so we do need to look at what those potential uses are as well. Do also keep in mind that any project of any significance on that site will have to go through design review. We won't get to dictate the use, but you will be able to have a discussion about the potential design. Keep in mind what those design review standards are when we're talking about creating walkable neighborhoods, talking about being human scaled. So any potential use would need to meet those design standards. So please just keep that in mind. Thank you.
And when you say that that has to have 3 replacement housing units, they have to be on those 3 parcels in particular, not just on the entire project. Like if they make it all one big plot, then they can put 3 units anywhere. Because there's place for
That's correct.
70 houses on that parking
They have
lot,
to be on those 3 parcels.
which is also known as a farmer's market right now. There's farmer's market there right now.
Okay. Based on the information presented and the discussion, which I appreciate was very robust, I move that the commission recommend that the city council approve this petition to amend the zoning map with the following condition pointed out, that attachment I, specifically stating that there needs to be a replacement for the 3 housings that will be anticipated as being lost, be part of the development agreement.
I will second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Berry and a second from Commissioner Bitten. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote.
Can you? That was submitting a positive recommendation with the
Correct.
requirement that 3 replacement units are on those lots.
Correct.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
No.
Commissioner Bitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Okay, I just want to state before I make my vote that one of the things that I like that kind of swayed me was utilizing that big surface parking lot, and that you're willing to do a development agreement specifically to replace those 3 houses in that spot, which alleviates my concern of some sort of restaurant that would totally make congestion. I would also just like to submit that when you do come back with whatever, that you do give special attention to some of the landscaping, that we actually maybe see an increased buffer along 2300 East, because right now it's really just that parking lot relationship. So with that, I vote yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
I feel like no is the more consistent rezoning answer for me. So I'm going to say no.
Commissioner Gant,
Yes.
and the chair will vote yes. That is 7 yeses and 2 nos, and that will be forwarded to the city council. Thank you. Our next and final item is rezone at approximately 500 South and 400 East. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00403.
Thank you, Chair. This is a zoning map amendment for 500 South and 400 East. So the request is for rezoning of 4 properties that are located at the northwest intersection of 500 South and 400 East. The proposal is for a rezone from RMU 45, or the Residential Mixed Use Zoning District, to the TSA UCC Zoning District, that's Transit Station Area Urban Center Core. One of the primary differences between this zoning district is that it allows for a greater building height than what is permitted in the RMU 45 zoning district. The applicant did not submit future development plans with this application. However, the anticipated use of the site is for ground floor retail with residential units above the first floor. And the staff is recommending that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. To provide a little more context with this aerial photo, you can see properties to the north that are also located to the northwest specifically that are also located in the TSA UCC zoning district. The city's public safety building is located to the west, and then there are other commercial buildings located to the south and to the east. It's within the Central Community Master Plan. Altogether, the property is a little over 1.25 acres. The land use designation is civic mixed use, and the review process is the zoning amendment and the general zoning standards. As far as existing conditions on 500 South, the photo on the left shows the Freshman's Jewelry building that was recently demolished. The photo on the right shows the property to the east, Lighthouse Research. It also fronts 400 East. And then on 400 East and to the north, there are 2 buildings that are currently used for commercial purposes. As far as the context surrounding the site, to the west is the city's public safety building. To the east is a 3-story commercial building. There is a building under construction to the southeast, the Citizen, which is a 2-story podium with 4 stories of stick above it. To the south are the 2-story commercial buildings. As far as key considerations, the first in the staff report was how the proposal helps implement the city goals and policies in the adopted plans. And so staff considered Plan Salt Lake, the Central Community Plan, and Housing SLC. The proposal would allow for a mix of uses, potentially residential uses with supportive retail or commercial uses. It would also allow for the redevelopment of underutilized land and could provide for new growth in areas that have existing infrastructure, and then also areas that could be people-oriented based on its close proximity to the track station. And it also encourages higher density residential in areas that are served by transit and can help in achieving the Housing SLC goal of entitling 10,000 housing units. As far as compatibility, the TSA zoning district allows for a broader range of commercial uses than the existing RM 45. It is appropriate near transit, and the property is within close proximity to the tracks red line and several bus routes. It does allow for greater height than the existing zoning district. However, most properties surrounding these properties under consideration allow for greater height than the RMU 45 zoning district. And while the RMU 45 zoning district has a number of development standards compared to other zones in the city, the TSA zoning district has even more requirements. As far as public process, early notification was mailed to property owners. There was an online open house posted. Staff has received a number of email comments that were included in the staff report, and there was one additional comment that was placed in your Dropbox earlier this week. And staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council.
Thank you. And we have the applicant.
The applicant called me just a few minutes before this meeting, and he came down with something this afternoon and was not able to attend. One of the property owners is here and is able to answer questions.
Okay, we can go ahead and have them come forward then. State your name for the record and you'll have 10 minutes.
We own the property 66 South, 400 East, and
considering a partnership with Cowboy Partners for the proposed site. We feel that higher density in this location is compatible. The entire block is commercial, and so at this point we don't have firm plans. We're starting with the zoning change. So that's all I have. Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? Seeing no questions, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to give public comment? Oh, we do have one person. Thank you for your fortitude and going all the way through this long meeting. State your name for the record and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Julie Renscher. We own the property at 460 South, 400 East. We are in favor of the proposed zoning map amendment for the greater building height allowance. We like the progressive trend that Cowboy Partners are following to increase housing opportunities downtown. The proposed change would give us, as property owners, some great options as the years go by to decide what we would like to do with the building, in years to come. So it just gives us more options. There already are taller buildings that were recently constructed, so it would not be an out-of-place type of thing. It would fit in well. And I also feel that this will improve the property values of everyone in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Oh, we do have another. Go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Luke Mischler, and I sure made some people grumpy earlier when I was actually here for this. I live here. I like this, but if you guys, put something in here, please make sure there's a bakery or a coffee shop or something. And since you're going to cover up the penguin or the flamingo, give me something interesting to look at. But yeah, density's good. I ride public transit every day. I love it, and it services this neighborhood pretty well, although you do have to hike a block or so up or down 4th, because this happens to be like in that dead band between 2 stops. But yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any emails come in the meantime? No. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we will come back to the commission.
I am confused. How is this not? So I'm trying to understand how this is not already TSA zoned. And I'll tell you why. Like, I looked at our zoning map the other day, and I looked along the S line, and there's a ton of stuff that's zoned single family. And I'm trying to understand, like, my understanding was we were basically required to come up with these station area transit plans for anything that has fixed rail. And yet, when I look at our zoning map, and this, regarding where we have TSA zoning, it doesn't seem like, I thought that would fulfill the requirements for the state, the transit area plan, the station area trend. You know what I mean. The station. Why are we not required for every single fixed transit station to have a plan like that?
Well, I can say one thing. We do have a plan. The plan doesn't mean that every parcel of property is going to be zoned TSA, but we do have to have a plan that shows
for every station.
That we're looking at every station, and we're looking at where those boundaries appropriate. Where should we have those? And I've been here long enough that I remember when these properties got rezoned. So it has been in the last 13 years. And we did have a livable communities grant. So we actually studied each and every one of these stations to determine what zoning was appropriate. At the time, it was a weird mixture of zones that don't exist anymore, some that do that are still tolerable zones. And so a lot of it became TSA. There was some that were carved out. This was one specifically that they did carve as RMU 45. And we're reaching back a while. I can't remember exactly why. But at the time, I think that there was a thought that they were trying to maybe buffer density with using 5th South as a way to kind of buffer as you go north. But I think that if we look at what's been happening in that neighborhood, looking at trends, we're looking at rezones. Kitty Corner from here was rezoned RMU not long ago. That's 75 feet, definitely more than an RMU 45. And so I think that some of our policies, goals, those kind of things have changed. And so now we're looking at the RME 45 and saying, was that really the appropriate zone? And so I think maybe this is actually a staff kind of saying, are we trying to fix a problem? And so I think that we're looking at our newly adopted master plans that we have that have been adopted since that plan, whether it's Plan Salt Lake or the like housing plans, things like that, that we do support the rezone to go to TSA. But it's a great question. Thanks, Commissioner.
I have a question about the setbacks. The setback says that it will be with an average of the setback, the principal buildings on the site, on the block. Traditionally on Fifth South, the buildings have been set back an additional, 20 feet from the sidewalk, and the same seems to be true from the map on 4th East. So is the intention that the development itself will have this kind of setback? Because I'm all in favor of it, if it will, if in fact that is the effect of the zoning change. It will mean that these properties will have to have a larger setback than they would under the current zoning.
So there is a specific setback in the TSA zones for 500 South, and that is that average of the other buildings on the street. So that would be compatible, would be the average compared with a public safety building. So that's the other building that's on that block face. And then on 400 East, there's not a specific setback that is required for that. So it falls into that all other streets category. And there is not a required setback on 400 East.
But you say that this zone requires the setback is the average of the block face. Why wouldn't that be true? Oh, I see what you're saying. Just for 500 South.
Correct.
And would you say the setback of the public safety building is where the building starts, or where the construction starts, where there's landscaping and so on?
It would be the face of the building is where the building starts. That would be the setback.
Because there's a defensive landscaping there.
So it would be, let me see if I have a photo. It would be on the building face itself, not necessarily, not that landscaping in front of it.
Okay, thank you.
If you're wondering, these setbacks are a legacy of the RO zone that used to be all of Fifth South, which required a 25-foot front yard setback. So that's why you see all those buildings set back that way.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council approve the zoning map amendment.
I second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Bitton and a second from Commissioner Santos Rivera. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
Commissioner Shear.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Bitton.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
No.
Commissioner Gent.
Yes.
And the chair will vote yes. That gives us 8 yeses and 1 no. And that will forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. And if we have no further business, we can go ahead and adjourn. Well, seeing none, let's adjourn.